Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Urban Update. I'm Byron Barnett. On the show today, a discussion of the importance of mentors, particularly for adolescent girls of color. Details on that in just a few. Also, the Museum of Afro-American History celebrates 50 years of preserving, conserving, and interpreting the contributions of African Americans. That's later on. But up first, author Tammy Bottner recounts the unthinkable choices in her grandmother Melly made in order to save her family during World War II, which included sending her 2-year-old son, Bottner's father, into hiding in a lonely Belgian convent. Did the trauma that Tammy Bottner's predecessors experienced affect their DNA? Could her inherited memories be explained by epigenetics, the genetics, the science that explores how things that happen to us modify our genes? In this moving family memoir, the author not only tells the saga of her family's experiences during the Holocaust, but it also serves as a scientific reflection on epigenetics. To continue this fascinating topic, we've invited Tammy to join us this morning. Welcome to the show, Tammy. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
The book, by the way, Among the Reeds, the true story of how a family survived the Holocaust. That's right?
That's right.
Okay. So we can start by just telling viewers a little background on you. You're, I understand you're a writer, a physician, and you're a mom with a direct connection to the Holocaust.
I am. I'm actually the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. My dad was a child survivor, and the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. My grandparents were young adults during World War II.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, before we get into the book, just tell us a little bit more about the science of epigenetics and the ideas behind it.
So epigenetics is the study of how everything that happens to people during their lives can modify our genes. And that changes the way the genes are expressed. And now we know not just that that happens, but when people have modified genes, have children, they inherit those genes in their slightly altered state. So something like the Holocaust, which was like an enormous life event, an enormous stressor, changed people's genes, and then their children inherited different genes because of that.
Just shed a little light on your book now. It's part family memoir and part scientific reflection on epigenetics. Is that correct?
That's right.
About your family, about the book rather, I should say. Talk to me more about your grandmother Melly and some of the choices. Well, the big choice she really had to make to have her family survive World War II.
Right. So my grandparents both found themselves in Belgium. They weren't originally from there, but they were in Belgium during World War II. And they had my dad in 1940, 3 weeks before the Nazi invasion. So they were faced with increasing discrimination and increasing pressure, and eventually, of course, Jews started to be arrested, picked up, and deported. And it was in that scenario that they made the really unthinkable choice to give up their child, to send him away into hiding alone. So he was 2 years old, and the resistance came and picked him up and brought him to a convent where he spent the next 2.5 years without his family, without anyone familiar, really unable to understand why he was there, what was going on. And the idea behind that, of course, was that my grandparents were very concerned that they wouldn't survive the war, and they didn't, if they got picked up, they didn't want him with them.
And you got these stories direct from your grandmother?
Of course, my grandparents and my dad.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Obviously, your dad wouldn't remember what happened when he was 2, but your grandparents would. You say this whole subject, everything is especially, in your view, your book is especially relevant during the times we're living in right now.
God, the times we're living in now are unbelievable. My book came out a few months ago. Right after it was published, we saw what happened in Charlottesville with, neo-Nazis marching in the streets and, screaming these absolutely horrific hate slogans. We're seeing here in Boston, the Holocaust Memorial was vandalized twice this past summer. And I was just reading that the incidence of anti-Semitic reported activities in Massachusetts and in Boston has skyrocketed in the last 2 years. So it's all too relevant, and I think that's one of the reasons I really want people to read the book, to realize what the end game of these kind of horrible hate crimes can be. It's not just, oh, it'll pass. Terrible things like this can lead to really terrible things. And so I think it's a wake-up call, especially in Boston.
Kind of back to the book and the epigenetics. Do you think that you've inherited memories yourself of this wartime trauma?
I don't think I've inherited memories exactly, but what research has shown, there's some really interesting research out of New York City at Mount Sinai, is that Holocaust survivors have altered genes related to stress hormones, and their children, so that would be me, have inherited those same altered genes and altered stress hormones, and that's without having gone through any trauma themselves. So they inherited that from their parents. So things that happened to our ancestors and our parents and our grandparents actually have very direct effect on how we function. I think that's absolutely amazing.
Well, and how has this affected you in any way?
So when my son was born, which was years ago now, but at the time I brought him home from the hospital, I was already a pediatrician. I wasn't terribly nervous about having a new baby. I was comfortable taking care of babies, but I experienced what felt like real life flashbacks. It felt like I was watching my son, lying there with me, and I thought, what if there were Nazi boots pounding up the stairs? What would I do to keep him safe? What's happening now? It was just like one thing after another. It was very, very disturbing, and I didn't know what to make of it really. But years later, when I started studying about epigenetics, I thought, maybe I have inherited some kind of echo of what my grandmother went through, my dad went through.
You obviously, these experiences did not happen to you, but
correct.
You've experienced some
very... It felt like they had, which is the strange part, but no, they didn't. Thankfully, did not.
What do you know about, I guess, this whole thing? Have you studied epigenetics much? Is it something it's kind of relative new science, I understand? Somewhat
new. There's a lot of studies going on about it, and it's thankfully it's not just about trauma. It's about all kinds of things. So, what people eat, how they exercise, their health choices that they make, their lifestyle, can not only affect their own genes, but that of their children. And so I think that's great. And sometimes people are more motivated to make changes if they think it's going to affect their children than even themselves.
And where can folks pick up a copy of your book?
So my book's available at some area bookstores. It's on Amazon. It's barnesandnoble.com. And I have a website, tammybottner.com, and there's links through that as well.
Okay, we'll leave it right there. Tammy Bottner. The author is Tammy Bottner. And the book is Among the Reeds, The True Story of How a Family Survived the Holocaust. And with an interesting, do you talk about epigenetics in the book as well?
I do.
You mix it in?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds like a very interesting read. Tammy, thanks for coming in. Good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Okay, coming up next, why it's more important than ever for the next generation of women to have a positive female role model to look up to. The discussion coming up right here on Urban Update.